I will say I'm quite surprised how many people this morning have been like sending me notes on LinkedIn and things being like, I can't believe you don't believe in the sort of niche. There's even a term for this.
I'm looking forward to this. Honestly, I advise a lot of companies and I advise them this. And so if you can teach me something else that's better, game on. But I tweeted for audience, the single biggest mistake pre-product market fit that companies make is they don't focus on a narrow enough customer segment, target an almost impossibly small audience, earn the right to do the next thing. You then responded.
At what hour, by the way, was it when I responded?
2:38 a.m. No, I'm joking. I'm not too sure. But you responded, pretty strongly disagree with this. Full stop. Help me. Why do you disagree with this statement?
Yeah. So first of all, let's see if we agree on a framework, and then we can get to this. So you're a VC. Mm-hmm. So instantly that carves you out from what I'm gonna call like the entrepreneurs like my parents, like, bootstrapped entrepreneurs. And you can build incredible bootstrapped companies and businesses. And when you do that, oftentimes focusing on a niche is the right way to do it. But the context of the tweet, I think, from you was in the context of you're an entrepreneur and you're going to raise venture capital, and that's a different piece. Or is that fair?
100% aligned. This is for startups going on a venture fundraising path.
Yeah, and so I think that the venture fundraising path, which again is not the path for everyone, it's not even close to the path for most people, but it's a path that has a certain set of characteristics and has a certain set of rules and has a certain set of outcomes that can be good and bad. So the next part of the framework I would suggest is, I think there are sort of three potential outcomes for businesses. One of which is amazing, right? You're wildly successful and you sell the business or you take it public or whatever. And it doesn't even have to be Cloudflare. Like it can be any number of things, but you have what people would call a success. And so let's take that one, and that's great. But that's kind of it's hard to optimize for that. So let's look at the other two outcomes. If the wild success is the best outcome, the second best outcome, I would argue, is quick failure. It just doesn't work, right? And it falls on its face and dies. That's actually a really great outcome. Because you lose some VC's money, but that's kind of the game, and it's fine. And it's, by the way, one of the reasons why I talked to a bunch of folks and they're like having all these angels. They're like, oh yeah, I let my Aunt Marge invest. Like that's the problem is that the second best outcome is quick failure, and one of the ways to make that second best outcome more likely than the bad outcome is not have your Aunt Marge, have professional investors who are your investors. So like at Cloudflare, we never raised like angel money. We never raised from friends and family, literally until we were going public. And then we let folks like that invest in the IPO, but we didn't do it otherwise. In large part because we were like, listen, we were going to be a 1 or a 0, and most likely we were going to be a 0. And if we were a 0, like, yeah, it sucked if we lost Venrock's money, but like that's their job, and it was good. I actually think the quick failure is again, it's not what you play for, but it's a good outcome. The worst outcome by far is the slog, where you have these companies that are growing just enough that it feels like success is just over the next hill, and so they can't stop. But nobody cares about them anymore, and their investors are tuned out and dread every board meeting, and you've got, I would guess, a bunch of slogs, and I've got a bunch of friends who I love and admire and respect, and they're in the slog, and you can wake up very quickly, and 10 years of your life is gone like that, and you look back and again, you can talk about this you get diluted, you get all this, but the real thing is, like, you just aren't proud of anything that you've done, and you've stopped learning about interesting things. that's the really bad outcome, and that's the outcome to try and avoid. Does that, again, as a framework, does that sound like it kind of makes sense?
We are totally aligned on that. 100% agree.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So with that context, so again, if you're a bootstrap founder, like this advice doesn't apply. If you're like, wow, that slog thing, that sounds like fun, then maybe this advice doesn't apply. So then you start to look at, okay, what is the path to doing this? And I think that the number one most important thing that you can do as a founder to try to get to success, or at least to figure out which of those things you're in as quickly as possible, is hire and recruit incredible people. Like, companies are just collections of people. The hardest thing by far that you do early on is recruiting. It is so incredibly difficult. Yep. And so, and does that also track? That seems
aligned.
Okay. So now the question is, and maybe again this is going to get down to somewhat semantics, but now the question is, let's say that you're Toby and you're starting Shopify, and you have two different options. You can be like, I'm going to build software that's really good for snowboard shops in Ottawa, Canada, to sell snowboards. And you got to go out, because that's the impossibly small audience, the impossibly niche product. And now you got to go out and recruit people to do that. Versus, I'm going to build the thing that is the replacement for Amazon, but allow anyone to have control over their brand and their identity and give them the power to do that. Which of those pitches gets you better engineers?
Honestly, I don't see it in that way. I think you have to show a journey from one to the other. But I think if you have an engineer that just sees a fluffy vision of we're going to take on Amazon, they go, yeah, good luck. And then if you have someone who says, hey...
You live in London, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of the really interesting things. It's like, why is the Bay Area still, the best place to start companies?
Oh, the unbridled optimism and the view that you can change the world. And
it is. I mean, when we were starting, and by the way, it's why it's the best place to start companies, but it's a terrible place to scale companies. Huh. It's because early on, I mean, again, we were like, we're going to run the internet. Like, if you go and you watch the TechCrunch pitch, and there's a judge at the end of it who, and I can't remember who the judge was, but Keith Raboy was on the panel. It wasn't Keith who asked the question, it was another guy. And he asked, what's your vision? And I was like, our vision is to run the internet. Mic drop, right? And that didn't seem absurd, right? And early on, we would ask questions like, if Cloudflare ran the entire internet, what would the right thing be? Technically, from a policy perspective, from a product perspective. And because of that, we were able to attract incredible people. If we had said that what we were going to do was help protect small business websites from cyber attacks, which is, even that's a pretty big vision, we would not have gotten the people that we got early on.
But my point is, I don't think it's binary, Matthew, which is like, you can say we're starting here, and when we do this, this, and this, that leads to this unlocking, and we then have the greater chance to make it. So
then you're still pitching then the big piece. And I would say also, it's really hard to know the thing that the thing is gonna work initially. So for instance, when Cloudflare launched, we had a problem, which was, we knew in order for this to be a big business, we needed to sell to really big banks and governments and financials, hospitals. We needed to sell like multi-million-dollar contracts on a regular basis, and that's what we do today. But in order to do that, we had to build models to give them some level of security. In order to do that, we needed to have data. In order to do that, we need to have customers. So in order to get customers, we had to have data. In order to get data, we had to have customers. So we had this chicken and egg problem. Yeah. And so we set out and we said, we're going to, launch with a free version of the service, and we're going to, just make it available to everyone. We didn't target who it was, but in the back of our mind, we thought that who would sign up for the free version of the service was going to be a bunch of startups and, individual developers and things like that. And that's not what happened at all. And if we had really said, we're going to focus on this and start there and, constrain it, and our marketing copy said, Cloudflare is a service for startups and small businesses and did all those things. If we'd started with the narrow funnel, then we wouldn't have figured out what happened, which is we made it. And the reason, by the way, why that worked is if you imagine an XY axis, and the X axis is sort of budget, right? And the Y-axis is, how many cyber threats you face. There's almost a perfect line that is, the smaller your budget is, the less cyber threats you face, the bigger your budget, the bigger the cyber threats you face, with one notable exception, which is civil society and human rights organizations. We would have never thought to go talk to civil society and human rights organizations. And yet, when we open it up, civil society and human rights organizations have almost no budget, but they have huge, huge, huge security risks. And so when this company came along and said, hey, we have this free version of the service, sign up for it, all of a sudden they flocked to what we were doing. And because, again, we started with a really big vision, and we had no idea who would initially sign up, but it was open anyway. I mean, Yahoo could have signed up which would have been crazy. But they didn't, because it didn't make sense. We really had no specific focus. And that was what allowed us to find the market in a way which was very different than you would otherwise.
But I think that's a very specific example related to Cloudflare, if we're being honest. I think
no. So even the examples you gave, so the eBay example, you're like, eBay started with Beanie Babies. So I've talked to the founders of eBay about that. That's complete and utter PR retrospective BS. And the reason that a lot of stories look like that is because almost nobody wants, if you're you're the journalist that you said before we started that you don't like, nobody wants to tell the story of hugely ambitious entrepreneur sets out on hugely ambitious task and succeeds. What they like is the story of cute thing started small and then turned really big. So the Beanie Baby story is a complete and total made up PR.
But I'm not saying that. You're conflating things, if we're being honest, Matthew. I'm not saying I'm against hugely ambitious founders. I'm just saying that having a very targeted ICP to find your first 1,000 true fans is a core tenet to what it takes to build a successful business many.
If that's all you're saying, fine. But that's a very, very, very narrow claim. And the risk of it is, again, if you start out with, we're going to build the snowboard shop in Ottawa, or the snowboard powered shop in Ottawa. Like, if you don't get that right, it could be that the place you think, it could be that it's actually people selling teapots where you find that initial task. And so if all you're saying is cast a wide net, but then appreciate your early customers and double down and focus and really understand them, then, that's fine. Again, in our case, the first 1,000 customers were all over the place, and I can't tell any discernible pattern between them, except for that they were crazy enough to sign up for us early on. We spent a ton of time getting to know them and focusing on them, but it was always to just learn and improve the product. What we were trying to solve was still pretty ambitious for them, but if all you're trying to claim is focus on your initial customers and really love and respect them, that's great. But where it runs a risk is if you start to say, we've got to do X. First of all, you'll attract people that think X is, even though you say the journey is much longer, that they'll think that that's the end state. And then secondly, it might be that you start to optimize for that end state where you're like, yeah, we're going to have the snowboard wax module and the bindings module, and we're going to focus on those very niche-y things, which turn out to actually then hamper you in terms of building towards that generic larger vision. So again, if your claim is as small as it's sounding like, then yeah, but then it's impossible to disagree with. It is very hard to find an actual startup founder that started out saying, we're going to do this small niche thing, and then it grew into this big task. Almost everyone early on, it's why founders, can come across as so crazy, is because of the fact that they do have these wild big visions.
I get you, but they start off with a very specific ICP, which is what I'm saying, which is 1,000 true fans, which is, if you look at any fintech, often it's kind of remittance payments, it's cross-border transfers. Those
are huge. Those are not niche. Like
no, but they are when you look. They are when you look at European spending patterns in Eastern European countries for
look at all that.
under 30.
Yeah, but it's the bigger challenge that I see is that typically founders actually set the box that they're shooting for much too small. Where I just got a pitch from someone who I have a ton of respect for. Is building something. And you think about, even if you're wildly successful at this, it's just not that big a market.
Does it unlock something else? Does it open the door for them to be able to do another product?
Maybe, but it is. There's Ray Rothrock is one of the early investors in Cloudflare, and he said, usually you start a company that he backs. He's like, usually you start with this big vision, and it just gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and you end up in this smaller box. I think it's actually very hard, and I spent some time this morning trying to think of an example. I think it's really hard to find the counterexample of you start with what is a more limited vision, and what you're going to say is, well, your vision and where you start, those are different things. I think you got to be careful though, because it turns out where you start, people start to optimize for that, and you can find just local minimums, and you can spend a whole bunch of time on that local minimum. I think you really do have to articulate what that bigger vision is. I think it's very rare to find someone who said, I started out just trying to build, the platform for, people to sell snowboards, and I ended up building Shopify, or I started out, building that small thing. I think that's a very, very, very rare case.
We're aligned there. I think we're totally aligned. And I have, when you're fundraising, you have to present the big picture. You have to present why.
When you're fundraising, you have to present a big picture. When you're recruiting, you have to present a big picture. Even when you're just trying to keep your mental health of why is this so hard, you have to believe in that big vision. So again, I think that the being overly focused is, and the curse is that founders try and do all the things, they try to understand all four corners of the problem that they're trying to solve.
But so I'm totally with you there, but you do have to show a tie back to where you are today and the proof points and milestones that you think you unlock over time that will get you there. And just run with me on this one. And on the customer acquisition side, we talked about funding acquisition, talent acquisition. Customers actually, generally, they do care where you're going long term, but they do also want to know about the efficiency that you've driven for existing customers. They want to resonate with your messaging today. If you have super horizontal product messaging, it's much harder to resonate with people. They want to resonate with your go-to-market. It's got to be a channel fit with them and how they engage with their product buying. And so actually, the here and now does matter there.
Yeah, but if your claim is as narrow as you're making it, then yeah, sure, you're right. But then just any entrepreneur who's listening to this, recognize that Harry's claim is extremely narrow. And that really, again, that VCs want you to shoot for very big outcomes. They want you to take on tasks that, if they're successful, can get you sanctioned by Russia and find you in incredibly world-changing opportunities. And sure, there's a journey along the way, But the goal is not, and it is very rare that you build the small thing and then it's like, wow, and then we realized we could build this bigger thing after that. When Zuckerberg starts Facebook, everyone's like, well, he was just trying to build something for Harvard. Again, I think he has to be on your bingo card of, I don't know if you don't play bingo in London, but do you know how that game works?
Yeah.
It has to be on the bingo card of people that you have on the show, simply to ask, like, okay, sure, you were building the thing for Facebook, but what was in the back of your mind, how early on did you think, wow, someday we could connect everyone online? And my hunch is that was within the first week.
I didn't disagree with that.
Cool, we agree.
Yeah. No,
I think it's really important, again, for when VCs say something like, you need to focus, people can mishear that as like it's important to start with a small thing and be very successful in that small thing, and then from that, and stay within the four corners of what you do. I think that's the biggest mistake that the biggest mistake that entrepreneurs make is picking bad co-founders. The second biggest mistake that they make is not setting their sights on an ambitious enough target. And I
think it's picking bad markets. There are some markets that are just shit, Matthew.
But that's for sure. I guess that's an ambitious enough target, right? It's like if all of a sudden you have cornered the market on providing services to sell people like me a new car, like there just aren't that. I mean, that's a bad market. Like, even if you're wildly successful, it's just not a big enough thing.
Yeah, I agree. Like consumer meditation, as an example. Your Headspace, your Calm have been in the market for 15 years. Great teams. Really? That's probably.
Well, again, I don't know enough about their business. I am amazed if you, though, look at healthcare spending at big companies, and you say, what, like, I was actually talking to another successful SaaS founder, and he said, we looked at our healthcare spending, and mental health ended up being by far the largest segment that we're spending money on. And so if you can say, for a big company, figure out a way to take that, what you're spending on mental health and make it significantly more effective and cost half as much, that's probably a pretty big market.
Oh, totally. But that's B2B mental health.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I only know the B2B world. So the B2C stuff, that just feels, that seems far more random. And
Matthew, is there any other BS that you hear from investors you see on Twitter that you're like, God, I wish these guys would just not?
Oh, I mean, there's a ton. Like, it's Michelle and I just went back to TechCrunch Disrupt, which was a few weeks ago. And I remember we were like, I wonder if anyone still comes to Disrupt, because we don't really think about it anymore. And you walked in, and it was record attendance, and everyone's there, and everyone's sort of there's a lot in the early stage startup and VC ecosystem that's a lot of sort of the court intrigue of, what does Harry think about this, or what does I don't know, Keith Raboy think about this, and I have to confess I haven't thought about that in a really long time. And I think part of Cloudflare's success was we were nobodies. Like, we didn't know anyone, and we didn't get invited to all the fun parties, and we weren't part of the cool kids group. And I think as a result, we just focused on how do we build a company. And so I just haven't spent a ton of time thinking. I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about it early on, and I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about it today. And yeah, every once in a while I'll see a tweet from someone like you, and I actually think there's a duty as somebody who has been successful. And again, you can be wildly successful as an entrepreneur and have an outcome which is you don't have to go public. It doesn't have to be $1 billion idea. But I think you can have an amazing bootstrapped business that gets to. It's actually Michelle, my business partner. Her husband, he's got two other guys, and the three of them just churn out bootstrap businesses, and they try to get each of them to cash flow basically $3 million a piece, because then they can basically each take $1 million, out, and then they just do it with the next one. They do it in the next one. That's amazing. In some ways, that's like the best possible business.
Do you not think in that case, I wonder what they could do if they actually focused. I'm not saying they'd do better. I'm just saying a thought experiment. Clearly very talented.
Again, it's if you can have reliably, from a SaaS business that you don't have to spend that much time on, $1 million that comes off of it, and then you can, with two other people who have different skill sets and you work well with, can go off and build a second one, a third one, a fourth one. That's pretty good. I think that
it is. But why didn't you just build the first one or a second one to something much bigger? Things compound over time and get easier, generally speaking. 100 to 150.
But it also can be, again, that's the place where focusing on a niche makes a ton of sense. There's a guy I went to business school with when we were in the same business plan competition. So you have Cloudflare on one side, and then the other person, Will Dean, who started Tough Mudder, which is a mud race.
Yeah, it's famous.
I think it's an open question whether they've been more successful or we've been more successful. They have no costs. They've got this thing that's just a machine that just kicks off a ton of cash, and he can go and focus on other things that he cares about. Whereas I think I got to show up every single day. And yes, on paper, it's much less likely you're going to have Will on your show. I'm not sure that that's optimizing for what real success is. Success will be when you're walking through an airport and you see someone wearing a Tough Mudder t-shirt, and every time I walk through an airport now, there's someone wearing a Tough Mudder t-shirt. So they've done really well.